Entry 9. Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division. There was a time when damnation was simpler. No metrics, no optimization campaigns, no mass targeting. Just one soul. One slow, patient ruin. You could work with your hands then. Shape the fall like a potter shapes clay. Not rushing, not scrambling, but whispering into the cracks. Waiting for the right moments to press your hand against the heart and feel it shift under your palm. I miss those days. The world was cruder then. Steel and stone, blood and banners. But the souls... oh, the souls were the same. Pride was pride, whether wrapped in iron plates or Instagram filters. And the fall, the true fall, always came not through overt sin, but through goodness rotted inward. Which brings me to one of my finer works. A soul that still makes the marrow of my memory warm with satisfaction. Sir Aldrich of Verdun. Sir Aldrich was a knight in the purest sense. Not merely a soldier, a legend. Merciful in battle, humble in victory, fiercely loyal to his king, to his brothers in arms, and most dangerously, to the interference itself. He knelt often. He prayed before every campaign. He gave away spoils of war to the poor. He wept at funerals for men who tried to kill him. He was, by every mortal measure, untouchable. So I did not tempt him with lust. I did not tempt him with greed. I did not whisper revenge into his dreams. No. Those were for lesser souls. For Aldrich, I chose something finer, something nobler. I chose praise. It started after a battle where Aldrich, against the advice of his captains, spared a captured enemy lord. He returned home to parades. Sermons were preached about his mercy. Songs were sung about his restraint. Women wept at the sight of him. He demurred, of course, spoke of unworthiness. But I saw it. The flicker. The moment he listens just a heartbeat too long to the crowd's adoration. The way his fingers tightened slightly on the reins when they cheered his name. So I whispered, not loudly, not often, but just enough. You are the sword of righteousness. You are the vessel of justice. You are the embodiment of mercy itself. And over the years, not days, not weeks, but years, that whisper took root. His humility turned performative. He began to watch how others watched him, began to savor the songs, the murals painted in his honor, began to believe that his victories were not gifts of grace, but testaments to his own divine election. And then the resentment came, small at first. A baron given honors for a minor victory, a younger knight praised for a clever siege. It gnawed at him. He smiled through gritted teeth, blessed them, congratulated them, and hated them inside. You're better, I reminded him. You are chosen. He started seeking battles not to protect, but to prove. To prove he was still the favored one. To prove that his mercy was more pure, his justice more righteous, his legend more eternal. And then, the final crack. A border city under the church's protection insulted his honor. No true slight, no rebellion. Just a few ill-chosen words from a drunken mayor questioning his motives. and Aldrich snapped. He gathered a private force. He stormed the city walls under the cover of darkness. He slaughtered soldiers sworn to the same faith he claimed to defend. He baptized the streets in blood and called it righteous judgment. When the church heard of it, they excommunicated him by sundown. He didn't even protest. By then, he was convinced that they had betrayed him. He died months later, alone, hunted, sick from wounds that never healed properly. No songs, no parades, no weeping maidens. Just a broken sword half buried in a swamp, and a soul that went snarling into the pit, still convinced he had been right. This is the true art. Not dragging a monster down, but bending a good man until he breaks himself. A monster's fall is expected. A hero's fall makes the ground itself crack. Because when a righteous man falls, he takes light with him. He leaves others stumbling in the dark. He leaves wounds that bleed for generations. And he never hears the snap of his own soul until it's too late. Sir Aldrich is remembered in some corners of the world, not as a villain, not even as a martyr, just a cautionary tale whispered among knights and soldiers. Beware the pride that rides in behind victory. They don't know the full story, but I do. And every time a good man craves the sound of his own name being sung more than the sound of prayer in his ears, I smile. Because pride is eternal, and time, no matter how it marches, always brings new banners to fall. Because when a hero falls, others stumble with him. One man's ruin is a tragedy. A good man's ruin is a legacy. Scrivix, Demon Class 4, Emotional Instability Division, Historian of Ruins. Oliver here. There's something colder about this one. Not the story itself. I've heard tales of knights and fallen heroes and know how they end. No, it's the way Scrivix tells it. Without anger, without mockery, just precision. And what unsettles me isn't how Sir Aldrich fell. It's how familiar it seems. The need to be seen, the need to be valued, the need to prove your worth, not to the world maybe, but to yourself. It doesn't always roar like arrogance. Sometimes it hides inside prayers, inside victories, inside the good things we cling to because we're too afraid to let grace be enough. It wasn't exactly Aldrich's sins that destroyed him. It was his virtues, twisted just slightly off-center, turned inward by a whisper he thought was his own ambition for righteousness. And that's what makes me pause tonight. Because it's easy to guard against obvious sins, easier to catch the lies that come wearing ugliness, but it's harder, much harder to catch the lies that come dressed in applause. It's harder to see the pride growing like ivy around your faith when it looks so much like fruit. I'm not afraid of falling into rage or hatred. I'm afraid of loving the sound of my own goodness more than the sound of his voice. I'm still standing, but tonight I'm standing quieter, watching the ground under my feet, listening a little more carefully to which voice I'm really hearing. Oliver. Entry 10. Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division. You have to catch them early. That's always been the rule. The old ones, The ones who have been staggering along the path of faith for decades, dragging themselves bloody and stubborn behind banners they barely remember raising? They are harder to move. They know the terrain too well. They have tasted failure and survived it. It is the new ones that must be crushed. The tender shoots, the sparks before the flame. Their faith is untested. Their roots are shallow. Their understanding is paper-thin and trembling. Strike fast, strike hard, and you can rip it up before it flowers, before it seeds, before it infects others. I have seen it happen 1,000 times. A new convert, bright-eyed and reckless and on fire, collapsing within months under the weight of doubt and loneliness. A first prayer shouted into the void and seemingly unanswered. A first humiliation among peers. The laughter, the isolation, the shame. A slow, choking silence where once there was boldness. That is the way it should be. That is the proper order of things. And so now I turn to Jacob Hill, freshly marked, barely born into faith, still slick with the illusions of certainty, still believing that the interference speaks at every sunrise, that every breath of joy must be a confirmation of his belonging. He's bright. And I hate that about him. Not in the way mortals mean brightness, not cleverness or charm. I mean a kind of inner shine, a light under the skin that he doesn't even know he carries yet. But it will draw predators like blood in the water. Already, I can smell the nervous pride coiling under his prayers. Already, I can taste the brittle hunger for approval when he speaks of his newfound beliefs. It won't be difficult. It shouldn't be difficult. I will isolate him, not by violence, but by exhaustion. I will whisper that he is alone, that he is foolish, that the things he believes in are not merely wrong, they are laughable. I will stoke the slow burn of embarrassment, make him question why he feels out of place, make him wonder if it really is conviction he holds, or simply fear of being different. And if he stumbles, even once, the shame will feed on itself. He will spiral without needing my help. A self-sustaining collapse, elegant, efficient, the way it has always been. But something is off. The plans blur when I think of them. I wrote down the sequence earlier, the precise temptations, the moments of applied pressure, the conversations to sabotage, and yet when I review the parchment, the ink runs sideways, pooling into shapes I can't recognize. Jacob resists, not by will, not by strength, but by some stupid, clumsy buoyancy that he doesn't even understand. I nudged doubt during his lectures, but he smiled afterward. It shakes off the discomfort like rain sliding from a shield. I pushed loneliness into his afternoons, the silence, the empty seats at his table, and yet he lifts his head and hums worship songs under his breath as he walks alone. It shouldn't be happening. It doesn't happen. Not to the new ones. Their roots are supposed to be tender. Their faith is supposed to wilt at the first drought. And yet he endures. Stupidly, blindly, as if something keeps catching him just before the ground can swallow him. I can feel it now. That pressure. That unbearable, endless weight pressing from nowhere, from everywhere, from the sense of a hand resting just out of sight, just beyond reach, ready to close around the soul I am trying to suffocate. Not oversight, not the courts, not any infernal authority. Something pure, something clean, something that burns brighter and hotter than the sun and hell itself, but without the actual heat. I claw harder. I push sharper doubts, sharper guilt, sharper loneliness. I breathe weariness into his bones. I stitch insecurity into the fabric of his friendships. I drench his mind in every whisper of "you are not enough." And yet, Jacob stumbles, but he does not fall. He aches, but he does not break. He prays, not with eloquence, not with grandeur, but with stubborn, defiant faith that refuses to die no matter how much rot I pour into the cracks. It is infuriating, it is humiliating, it is unnatural. This is not how it should go. This is not how it has ever gone. When we strike the new ones, they collapse. They do not smile into the void and whisper thanks for the pain, and yet Jacob refuses to die. I will not be made a fool again. I will not lose another. I will tear him down if I have to burn the very air around him to do it. I will not be erased. I will not be ignored. I will not... No, I have not lost, not yet. I'll write again soon. I will document his ruin. It will be slow, it will be painful, it will be mine. Signed, Scrivix. Demon Class 4, Emotional Instability Division, still here, still fighting. Well, that entry was a little strange. I've been thinking about it for a long time tonight. Long after I closed the journal. Long after the words stopped bleeding off the page. Scrivix can't see it yet. He's too tangled in his own hatred, too wrapped in the illusion that his war is still a fair fight. That if he just tries harder, strikes sharper, whispers longer, he can win. But it's obvious to me now. And it would be almost funny if it weren't so achingly beautiful. Jacob isn't standing alone. He was never standing alone. Every clumsy prayer, every tired hymn hummed in the dark, every desperate reaching for light he couldn't see, he was being carried. Carried by a grace so quiet, so unassuming, that a demon as seasoned and brutal as Scrivix couldn't even recognize it for what it was. Not because it wasn't there, but because pride blinds more surely than any veil. Scrivix still thinks this is a battle he can win. He still thinks he can claw Jacob away from the light if he just finds the right angle, the right weakness, or the right pressure point. And he doesn't realize, he never has, that the only reason he was ever able to touch Jacob in the first place was because heaven permitted him to do it. Not out of weakness, but out of strength. Because every trial Jacob endures and survives isn't a mark against grace. It's a proclamation of it. Every whisper of doubt Scrivix breathes, every cruel pressure he applies, every snare he sets, it is all swallowed up in a deeper mercy that turns even evil's best efforts into stepping stones towards sanctification. Jacob isn't losing. He's being refined. And Scrivix, for all his rage, for all his ancient cruelty, is just a pawn playing into the hands of a king that he cannot touch. I think that's what stings the most for them deep down, the demons. Not that they lose, but that they are made to serve the very glory they seek to destroy. Every failure, every collapse, every furious whisper, it all bends back toward the light. Not because evil wanted it, but because it never had a say to begin with. There's a line in scripture I keep thinking about. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Jacob's struggle is not a sign that he's abandoned. It's a sign that he's beloved. And as I sit here, the journal open beside me, I realize something else. I'm not abandoned either. Every time I thought I was failing, every time I thought I was alone, every time I felt the silence pressing in and thought it meant absence, it was actually the presence of a God who doesn't need to shout to be near, doesn't need to shout to be heard. The war is real, the enemy is real, but the victory was written long before the first whisper of temptation ever hissed its way into human ears. And tonight I believe that in my bones. Signed, Oliver. Entry 11. Unit 6B, Emotional Instability Division, Scrivix. There's nothing wrong, there's nothing broken. These things happen. We lose momentum sometimes. We face setbacks. The work isn't clean, not efficient, not predictable, not like they pretend it is in the oversight reports. It's always been this way. Always. Jacob Hill is no different. He's just resistant, slippery, a minor anomaly. A complication to be corrected with sharper tools and heavier hands. I know the methods. I know the rhythms of collapse better than most. You isolate first, then you shame, then you offer false comforts, anger, cynicism, lust, anything to plug the wound faith leaves behind when it tears loose. And if that fails, if for some reason the soul still clings, then you break the body, crush the surroundings, fracture the relationships, sour the dreams, strip the future bare. There are always ways. Always. Jacob should be unraveling already. I laid the foundations. I planted subtle whispers of pride. I sowed the seeds of alienation. I whispered every shame for every clumsy prayer, every failed temptation resisted. The ground should be soft underfoot. The structure should be creaking already. But it isn't. He stumbles, yes. He falters, of course. But he keeps reaching for something beyond himself. Clumsy, broken, and yet effective. There is a weight in his prayers I cannot dislodge. A stubbornness that grows heavier the more I strike. It shouldn't be happening, not to him, not to a child barely out of spiritual infancy. Not when I have measured the angles, timed the pressure points, and calculated the collapse. It is the air. The weight pressing down again, the one I cannot name, the one I will not name. It warps my work. It makes the edges of my words blur when I try to write them. It makes the very pages hot. There's something wrong with my journal itself. I wrote the entry before, the strategies, the stages, and when I turned back to it, half the ink had bled into strange, unformed shapes. Not erased, not gone, just distorted, as if the words themselves were trying to flee the page. I rewrite, I adapt. I will not be undone by faulty parchment or phantom resistance. I attacked through pride again today. Jacob sat in a lecture hall surrounded by clever voices, sophisticated sneers cloaked in academic language. I whispered, "You are alone among fools, you are brighter, you are better." It should have bloomed into arrogance, into disdain, into resentment. Instead, Jacob bowed his head, prayed quietly, visibly, in the middle of the room. He thanked the interference for humility. He asked for a softened heart. He smiled at the mockers. It burned. It burned worse than defiance would have. It was victory, but it was not mine. I tried to write a second plan, to escalate. The ink on this very page fought me. It bled backward, ruining 3 pages. I tore them out. I scrawled new schemes, harsher ones, and still the parchment shuddered under my hand as if something unseen was breathing against it. Watching, judging, refusing to let my words root. I sharpened my whispers. I sowed doubt, fear, and loneliness and exhaustion. I called on every old cruelty that had worked in 1,000 other souls. And Jacob knelt beside his bed tonight, tears running down his face, thanking the interference for loving him in his weakness. Not despite it, but because of it. He prayed through his failure. It is unbearable. It is wrong. I will not lose him. I will not be erased. I will not be ignored. I will not be left to rot nameless and forgotten among the failures of my kind. Jacob Hill will fall. He must. Or else. Or else what? Or else I was never anything at all. Signed, Scrivix, Demon Class 4, Emotional Instability Division. Still fighting. Still fighting still. I can feel it now. It's not subtle anymore. The walls are cracking. Scrivix is unraveling, bleeding into the very pages he once wrote with such cold precision. And it's not because Jacob has become invincible. It's not because the attacks have stopped being clever, sharp, and personal. It's because the attacks don't matter anymore. They can't root. They can't infect. They can only shriek against the stone walls of something deeper, something stronger, something more eternal than all the malice hell can muster. Grace. Scrivix doesn't understand it. He can't. He thinks the war is about strength. The strongest will, the sharpest temptation, the deepest cut. He thinks if he just crafts the right collapse, the soul will cave in like every other broken thing he's ever touched. But grace doesn't work that way. It's not strength that Jacob draws on when he kneels, broken, weeping prayers into his pillow. It's surrender. It's trust. And the enemy, the interference, as they call it, has never been impressed by pride. It has always moved strongest in the broken, in the weary, in the ones who know they can't stand on their own. Scrivix is raging against a fortress he will never see the foundations of. He claws at the surface cracks while roots run deeper than he knows how to dig. And the more he rages, the more he loses, because pride has no patience, and grace doesn't need speed. It just needs to be. Tonight, I don't feel the despair that haunted the earlier entries. I don't feel the fear. I feel awe. Awe that all the fury of hell still cannot topple a boy praying with cracked words and trembling hands. Awe that the war was not won with thunder, but with a whisper. And that the grace holding Jacob is the same grace that has carried me every time I thought I was falling into silence. Signed, Oliver. Entry 12. 5 years ago. The parchment is warped tonight. The ink runs along the fibers like blood finding cracks in broken stone, but I, Scrivix, write anyway. Because if I do not act, if I do not win, then the punishments awaiting me will make the last 1,000 years seem like indulgence. Management summoned me today. Not in the usual way. No smirking intermediaries, no passive-aggressive memos half-burned on arrival. No. They sent for me directly, escorted by enforcers from the reclamation divisions. The ones who deal with failure not through demotion but through recreation. You see them sometimes, if you know where to look. Hunched figures wandering the lower corridors, muttering to themselves, stitched together from the remnants of what they once were. They used to be like me. Once. The meeting chamber was colder than usual. No fires, no noise. Only the sound of my own footsteps echoing far too loud on stone that looked suspiciously like bone. And then, at the far end, sat the division head. Cloaked in writhing shadows, face unreadable, voice like rusted iron dragged over glass. He didn't scream, he didn't threaten, he simply spoke. The soul of Jacob Hill is not yours to fumble. He is marked. Marked by the interference for greater work. If you allow him to flourish, if you allow his flame to survive, you will not simply be reassigned. You will be remade. The words etched themselves into my mind, sharper than any branding iron. Remade. Reconstructed into something lesser, something grotesque. Something that still served, but without memory, without dignity, without name. They said Jacob Hill was marked. They do it for the worst of us. They make examples of us. They turn failures into reminders that hell tolerates ambition, tolerates cruelty, tolerates even rebellion. But it does not tolerate waste. And if I lose Jacob Hill, they will carve my failure into my very being. They will hollow me out and leave me crawling, nameless, through the dust of my own disgrace. I've seen what they do. I will not join them. I will not become one of the forgotten. I will not. Hell asked me if I needed help. If perhaps they could assign another demon to my case. I laughed at them until I was blue. Me, Scrivix? In need of help to bring ruination to a human soul? No. Not mighty old Scrivix. I could sell crack to a priest. I'm the demon who turned knights into butchers, faithful into fools. I will be the solitary author of Jacob Hill's destruction. I know his importance now. It's not just his soul at stake. It's the flame he carries. The lives he will touch if left unchecked. He doesn't even know his own weight yet. But the interference does. And now so do we. That is why they are watching so closely. That is why management cares. A single spark can burn an empire to the ground if it catches the right wind. And Jacob Hill is a spark waiting for breath. I will not let him ignite. I will crush him. I will bury him. I will sever the roots before they can drink deeply enough to grow, even if I must burn the fields around him. Even if I must tear apart every relationship, every hope, every sacred dream he clings to, I will have his soul, I swear it. I will have the soul of Jacob Hill. I will. The journal ends in scrawls and scratches, words dissolved mid-sentence. Jacob Hill. The name blazed in my mind the moment I read it. I knew I had heard it before. Not in the journal, not in the whispers, but in the steady hum of a world being quietly remade. I, Oliver, sat there in the dark, the journal still trembling faintly in my hands, as I whispered into the silence. Why, God? Why show me all of this? Why let me carry the weight of these pages? And then, without violence, without terror, the television turned on. No shrieking static, no howling demons, just light, just warmth. And there he was, Jacob Hill. The name that shook nations not with anger, not with politics, not with noise, but with prayer. With simple, relentless, unshakable faith. The same Jacob Hill Scrivix swore he would destroy. The same Jacob Hill, heaven shielded through every whispered doubt and midnight attack. Preaching to tens of thousands, calling broken men and women back to the light. Not with cleverness, not with spectacle, with humility, with hope. With a strength forged in fires I now knew he had never faced alone. And I understood. This journal was not a trap. It was not a temptation. It was a testimony. A testimony that evil roars, but collapses under its own weight. A testimony that grace endures, not through might, but through faithfulness. A testimony that every whispered prayer, every clumsy hymn, every exhausted act of trust shakes the very foundations of hell. Jacob Hill was not spared because he was strong. He was spared because heaven is stronger still. Because grace moves quieter than evil expects, but infinitely more powerful. I finish transcribing these pages not to glorify the darkness. I finish them because someone else someday will need to know that the war is real, that the whispers of temptation are persistent, that the darkness knows your name, but more importantly, that the light knows it too, and the light never forgets. And the light never loses. Let this be a tribute. Let it be a warning. Let it be a promise that faith, even when battered and bloodied, is never alone. And that in the end, when every demon has raged themselves into dust, when every proud whisper has rotted into silence, only one voice will remain, and it will not be theirs. It will be his. Signed, your faithful servant, Oliver.